Hello, welcome to Mixing Plants and Crafts. My name is Rachel, and today's video we are going to be talking about the Pilea Peperomioides, the Chinese money plant. She's leaning and she needs a repot. I wanted to go through my caring experience with this plant in the hopes it would inspire you to get one or give you some ideas of what to expect if you already have this plant. I got my Pilea last year in February as a starter plant. Now, I did have a plant before that one in 2022. It was also a starter plant. It did not grow for me. It felt like it was stuck and something was wrong with the way I was caring for it. So last year in February, I actually bought another one in the hopes to see if I can try again or figure out my care routine with the plant. Now, sometimes I feel when you get a starter plant, it doesn't take off as you hope it would. Sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. So the one I had in 2022, I still actually do have that one. I'll show you. So this is the plant I got in 2022. There's two plants in here and I did have just one plant. I'm going to compare this plant. There's a big difference in size. I mean, yeah. That's what I say. Sometimes starter plants work for you and sometimes they don't. So this plant, when I got the other starter plant, I beheaded the plant completely off and then I stuck the top cut in water and rooted it, and then I stuck it back into soil, and now I have two plants. And I actually just repotted this plant a few months ago, and I can see the roots in here, and I actually can see a Pilea pup forming right there. So it seems to be doing a lot better. I'll give you my caring tips, how I take care of the plant, but I'm actually going to share a lot of my experience with it. So I hope you find this information helpful that I'm going to share, and it does inspire you to get this plant or learn more about the plant you already have. The Pilea loves light. It's bright indirect light. So basically it's filtered light throughout the day. The plant will tell you what it needs. If there's not a lot of light, it will become leggy. I was actually, oh, sorry. I was actually hoping that this plant would get a little leggy so I can behead it, but it's not. Did take out some leaves a few months ago from this plant at the bottom to see if I can get it to get a little leggy so I can chop it off, but it did not. And it is leaning. It wanted more light on one side and not on the other. So it's like, it's good to rotate your plants. In my defense, I do rotate my plants. I pick it up to water it, and when I water it, I take a look to see if it needs to be turned. So this plant sits directly underneath that west window, so it does get a little bit of direct light during spring and summer. I'm not afraid of it. I have monitored it, looked to see if the leaves were getting burned, but everything's still fine with it, so I'm leaving it at a west window. So my watering routine with this plant, I do water it when the soil is dry. I actually have a lot of drainage hole on this pot. This is not even a plant pot, it's like a saucer. I had to repot this plant sometime last year because it had root rot. Overwatering. Could you believe I was an overwaterer? Now I'm an underwaterer. I did repotted it last year and took it out of the pot that it was in, and I added more drainage hole just so it can get a little bit more aeration. In case I were to overwater it again, I feel like this gives me a little safety with overwatering. When this plant wants water, it tells me. If you've watered your Pilea, you can tell by the leaves if it's plumped and firm. I don't really do the taco test or anything like that, but I can just tell by touching the leaves if it needs water. This plant, I'm touching the leaves and it's not as firm, it's a little soft. So it definitely needs water, and I mean, if you look at the soil, it is dry. So I would water this. I should have watered this already. This one I am good at watering. This one does not need water. I actually watered it a few days ago and it's doing fine. I don't trust my soil test completely for water. For one thing, there's a lot of Pilea babies in here, and it's really hard to tell if the soil is wet or dry on this one because of all the babies. So the soil where the Pilea babies are, it is quite firm here, so I don't usually trust my looking at the soil to see if it's wet. I just feel my leaves. I use filtered water and or distilled water with my plants. Our house water is softened water, so I don't trust that the softened water through a water softener would do good with my plants. I have tested some of the softened water on some of my other plants and they're doing okay. I can tell that there's some browning on the leaves. It could also be from me underwatering my plant. For soil, I use a very well draining potting mix on this plant. I add amendments to my soil. I don't just use straight up potting mix. It is too dense. It's going to leave the plant pot wet, and that's not good for plants. So I use amendments, which I use orchid bark, charcoal, pumice, and perlite with my mix so I can have a more well-draining soil. I will be repotting this plant soon. It definitely is in need of a repot. Fertilizing, I do fertilize with every watering off this plant with Foliage Pro. So the other thing about this plant that I experienced in spring, it surprised me with some flowers. I was shocked when I saw that this plant was flowering. I actually thought it was dying and something was wrong with it. I had to go do some research to figure out why the plant was flowering. And come to find out, flowers in spring if the temperature is right. So in winter and spring, this plant room is a little bit more chilly, I think. So in winter, it's down to like 50 degrees, 50 to 55 degrees, and the same for spring. So the difference with spring is that in the morning it is cold, but then during the day it gets a chance to warm up. So with the plant getting that cold burst in the from night to morning, and then in the afternoon it warms up, that helped it flower. I would say if you're looking for more leaves on this plant, you might want to cut the flowers off. What I do in my care, if a plant flowers, I like to observe it and see what's happening with the plant and if it's common, uncommon, and just see the process. I don't like to just snip flowers off. Although I do want foliage, I want to see what this plant is experiencing to learn from the plant so I can either, if I want to have flowers next year, I know what to do. Now, I definitely want flowers again next year because I'm going to try to see if that's going to happen. The flowers on these plants are small and dainty, and it kind of reminds you of clusters or tiny stars. After you get Pilea blooms, the plant will stop growing. So the very cool thing about this plant is that the flowering buds will stay closed until it comes in contact with something, but that's later on in the flowering process. I did read ahead on what to expect from these Pilea flowers. I knew that they were going to give me a puffing explosion, so I've been waiting for it for weeks. I had cameras up. I was waiting for it. Up until the flowers started dropping was when I realized it was giving me a puffing explosion, and it happened by accident. So I noticed that the flowers had fallen, so I was cleaning it up, and then in my hand it was bursting pollen. So I had to go investigate and help it along. I did get video on that, and I'm so thankful I did because that was quite an experience for me. About 8 weeks ago, my Pilea Peperomioides started flowering. A lot of us were waiting for the puffing to take place because that's what happens when a Pilea flower. There is a puffing explosion. What's happening now? It is not doing any explosion. The flowers are falling down. Just put my hand right here. There's a lot of flowers. I don't know if I missed the puffing explosion, but the Pileas, seriously, it is just falling. I just made this one explode. Alright, let's see if I could do this again. I enjoyed having the flowers. So they're not boring plants. They're quite fascinating. The other fun part about this plant is that it gives you tons of babies. If you think I'm kidding, I currently have 11 babies on this plant, and since the flowers fell off from the plant, these babies came out, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 6 babies in here. That's a little too much. This is one plant you don't need to buy, because if one of your friends own this plant, I bet you can get some Pilea babies, because I'm about to give some away. To propagate these babies, what I'm going to do is I am going to just snip this off and then put it in water. It will grow roots and I can pot it up. I'm not going to do that today. We'll do that on the air another time. I'll probably do it in a couple weeks when I can do all of them, and I'm gonna have to figure out who I'm gonna give these to. The downside to having all these babies is that you have all these plants to take care of the same plant. I don't usually like having more of the same plants unless you're a prayer plant. That's different, because I love those. But I don't like to have multiple plants of the same one, so I'll have to figure out what to do with it. If you already have the Pilea, let me know your findings on this plant. If you had flowers this year, let me know that as well. I love to hear your experience about this plant. And if you don't have it but want one, I bet you if you have another plant friend with this plant, you can get it for free because of all the babies. So thank you so much for watching this video. I'll see you next week.